welcome to Drupal GovCon day number 3, bright and early, 9 a.m. Thank you all so much for coming. This is automated accessibility testing, a topic that has been gaining traction more and more over the years. As part of my obligatory introduction, who is this guy standing up front that's talking to you at 9 in the morning on a Friday? My name is Brian Thompson. I'm the director of web engineering at a company headquartered up in Baltimore called MindGrub. We build websites, mobile apps, robots that deliver snacks around the office, and lots of other cool things. We are hiring. That's enough of that part. I've been working with web technology since 2006, which means I'm almost hitting my 13-year anniversary, which is crazy. I'm on Twitter. I will tweet a link to the slides after the presentation, and then we'll also get the video up there as quickly as possible. I also like to bake. I go outdoors, camp, get as far away from technology as I can, but when I am in town, I tend to use technology as much as I possibly can. Which really got me thinking a number of years ago about accessibility. And it's not a topic that I find myself encountering very often until I was camping one time and rolled out of a hammock. When I rolled out of the hammock, I put my hand out to catch myself, which is probably the worst thing I could have done because I ended up spraining my wrist. Went to the patient first urgent care location, and they gave me this huge brace that I had to wear on it. And so my hand is all wrapped up, can't use my fingers, can barely use my thumb. I have a pretty decent club if I need to club somebody, but that's about all it's good for. And at the time, I was in high school, and I go in that Monday after being at urgent care Sunday evening to my very first class of the morning at 8:50, where the teacher tells me that we are going to have a surprise typing test to test how quickly we can all type as part of my Intro to Computers course. Of course, in an Intro to Computers course typing, you type J 3 times, then you hit space, then you type F 3 times and hit space. And all of that works great when you have 2 hands to be able to work both sides of the keyboard. In my case, every time I tried to use the fingers on my left hand that were in a brace, I managed to push Z, X, C, and V, the row underneath where my fingers were sitting, because they all just kind of moved as one. And there was nothing they could really do about that. They just said, well, do your best during the test. I'm sure it won't matter in the end anyway. And I was like, well, great. But it got me thinking that, I don't normally have problems. I consider myself fairly healthy. But here I am encountering trouble doing something that I do on a day-to-day basis. Even more recently, just last weekend, I was having dinner with one of my aunts, and after dinner, she said, oh, let's play dominoes, which was a game she loved to play when I was younger with kids, my brothers and I, who were in town. And we said, okay, we'll play dominoes. And as we're sitting there playing dominoes, this realization hits me that she can't actually see the numbers on the dominoes. Even though she claims her eyesight is fine, she drove to us to have dinner with us, but we're sitting there at a table, light overhead, black dominoes, white pips on the dominoes, those are the little dots, and she can't actually see whether she has double 6 in her hand or not. She's using her fingers to feel what number dominoes she has. And it continues to open my eyes for accessibility and making the web more accessible, and continues to be a topic that I push on all of the projects that I work on, even beyond just sight. I gave an example not being able to see dominoes. I also gave an example not being able to use my left hand. And so there's this tweet from Andrea, who works for Yoast, or previously worked for Yoast. Would you build a bridge that only a specific type of car can use? And that was her answer to, should you make a website accessible or not? Should you make a mobile app accessible or not? Would you make a website that only a specific type of person can use? Separately from all of that, I was working on a project that had an audience where there were explicit requirements for reading level. We had to make sure that all of the content in the website was no greater than a 5th grade reading level, because the adults who were using it weren't going to be skilled enough to understand words larger than what they would normally learn in 5th grade. It's not something I think about. I sit down and I write a blog post. I write a session submission for GovCon or any other talk. I don't really give a lot of thought to what reading level I'm writing at. I just write the talk, write the presentation, and submit it. And all of those continue to open my eyes and continue to be sort of top of mind as I look to solve this problem, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. And if you've read the news anytime over the past maybe 6 years or so, 5 years, about accessibility cases, you'll learn that Toys R Us was sued by a woman alleging that they violated the Federal Disabilities Act. Toys R Us is now out of business. The woman won. On top of all of that, even more recently, Winn-Dixie got taken to court over their website accessibility. Large brand, 2017. Winn-Dixie claimed that it would be an undue hardship to spend the $250,000 that they estimated it would be needed to make their website accessible, that they could not do that. The judge ruled against them and told them that $250,000 was not a hardship to make their website accessible. And even more recently, there's this website called Wet Willie's. Now, it's 9 a.m. on a Friday. I'm on a government network, so I won't pull the site up for you. But I did take a screenshot. It's not that bad, depending on your definition of bad. This is the Wet Willie's website. It's actually a bar down in Florida, or a chain of bars that's taking over the East Coast. This was their website as of about a month ago. It's very 1990s-ish. As you saw on my previous slide, the bear in the corner waves to you repeatedly. But they also got taken to court recently. And not only did they get taken to court, but Sabre Technologies, which is the company that built their website for them, also got taken to court for not making the website accessible and not advising their client that the website needed to be 508 compliant, accessible to those people with disabilities. Now, this court case hasn't settled yet, as far as I know, but the precedence has now been set that we as web developers, whether it's directly for the company we work for or whether we work for an agency that's building websites for other people, could potentially be targeted, and depending on the outcome of this case, could be at risk for making websites that aren't accessible to everyone. It's kind of scary. And so we need to care about this, and that's why I put together this talk to try and help us with it, because every time I bring this topic up, of course, the salespeople I work with say, well, how much is it going to cost to make this website accessible when we're selling it to the client? And it was something that I wasn't really sure how to price originally or tell them how much effort was going to be needed, because it could vary so much from site to site. And so my estimates were all over the board. Maybe it's something where we just need to spend another 10% of the time, all the way up to maybe 50% of the time. And on top of all of that, even as a web developer, if I'm not the one responsible for the content, I have to spend time training my client who's putting content in to make sure it's accessible. And so my sales team kind of told me that 50% of development to make a website accessible was a bit unreasonable. And I agreed with them that that could be a sizable amount of money. On a website that's $100,000 for the sake of easy math, that's another $50,000 to make that website. But my logic was, in order to go about doing this and confirming that we were compliant with the accessibility guidelines, we had to put a room of people together to be able to test accessibility, to actually confirm that we did what we were saying we were doing. Sure, as developers, we could follow the best practices, make sure we're running it through various tools, but ultimately, every time we went to deploy or went to launch, we had to have a room of people doing that testing. And for sites that were pushing towards continuous delivery or were on every 2-week release cycles, that gets really pricey when I have to have a room full of people pretty much continuously testing for accessibility every 2 weeks as the development team is trying to ship new features in this agile methodology. And so we put our heads together and tried to come up with a solution. And we took inspiration from one of the manufacturing companies we work with that recently outfitted its entire pipe fitting factory with automated robots that use lasers and other pieces to pick up parts out of a bin, do what they need to do, and move them on to the next step. It's really cool if you ever get to tour factories. Tesla does the same thing now as they shift to become more profitable. But so the question became, how is it that we can make the robots do the work for us? And as we got into that, we found that there were a few caveats. For starters, most of the automated testing applications that are out there are reasonably okay, but they work with WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. 2.1 only just came out on June 5th, nearing the 3-month mark on that. But those tools haven't necessarily been updated to take advantage of all of those new requirements. Even if you're still manually testing, I'd recommend that you go out and look at the new WCAG guidelines that are in place. A lot of them are focused around the mobile experience and people using websites on their mobile phones, but they significantly added a few new suggestions or requirements to make your website accessible. On top of all of that, automated accessibility testing is not perfect. The automated accessibility testing tools will cover maybe 20 to 50% of what you actually need to do to make your website accessible, and they aren't a full replacement for human testing. But if I can shave 20 to 50% or 50% of that time off of the manual testing, and I can be more confident when I go into the manual testing that I have an accessible website, that's good. Automated tools can also be temperamental, as you'll see during the demos that are coming up later in the presentation. When they work fantastically. If they don't work, you're in for a fun afternoon or morning. And the final caveat is that big websites can take a long time to test if you're going to be looking at all of the different pages. Even with automated tools, if it's going page by page, essentially crawling your website, you can spend a significant amount of time on that, albeit time that a computer is spending versus a human, so potentially slightly cheaper. So, what are some options that we can look at when we come to automated accessibility testing? That's why you all are here. You want to know what you can take back and on Monday start implementing in your day-to-day jobs. We're going to talk about 3 of them during the presentation today. The first one is the Wave API. The second one is Google Lighthouse. And the third one is called Axe. And we'll deep dive into each of them. We'll start with the Wave API. Everybody's familiar with the Wave web browser tool to be able to test accessibility, where you can go to wave.webaim.org and put your website URL in and see graphically what's going on. Or maybe you have the browser extension for Chrome or Firefox that you can run to test accessibility. This allows us to automate that. Rather than having to manually go there as a developer and run my website through the Wave accessibility tester, instead I can do that through a continuous integration CI process using their API, making a simple GET request and getting back a response. So, let's see what that actually looks like. All you need to do is go to wave.webaim.org/API/request, and then you specify 2 parameters, one of them being an API key that they give you, and the second one being the URL that you actually want to test. So, I will bail from the presentation, and I will switch over to Postman. Everybody read that in the back okay? We're good? Wonderful. All right, so if you've never used it before, Postman is an API request tool, very similar to working in your browser, except it will give you a few more options. It's better than using curl on the command line, unless you're a command line ninja. But it's fairly simple, where all I have here is a URL bar, where I've put in that particular address. I've specified my API key, which I will revoke after this talk. And I will also specify the URL that I want to test. In this case, what better site to test than the conference website we've been using for the past couple days and beforehand. There's no other headers that I need to set. All I can do is keep it set here to my GET request. I will hit send, and as long as the Wi-Fi holds out, it looks like it did, I'll get back a response. Now you'll notice that this response is in JSON format. You'll also notice that Postman likes to pretty my JSON responses, which it has failed to do. And the reason for that is because the Wave API is a little shaky. You'll notice that even though it gave me back JSON, according to the headers it sent back, the content type it gave me was text HTML, which this obviously is not. This is JSON. So if I switch it to JSON from my viewer drop down here, you'll see it organizes it slightly better. I got back a status code of 200, a success. I get back a few statistics. It took 1.09 seconds. I'm down to 78 credits remaining. I have 2 more demos, so if you guys are using my API key, please save me at least 2. I can view that online if I want to view the report online. And then I get into what the actual errors are in this categories section. So within that, there are 0 errors. There are 2 contrast errors, 3 alerts, 6 features, 19 structural elements, and a few more things. But what you'll notice as I kind of scroll down here is nowhere does it actually tell me what those are. Which means it's told me that I have a problem, I have a contrast issue, but I have absolutely no idea what that issue actually is. Kind of annoying. And as a developer, this doesn't save me any time. This is like the client sending me an email that says, it's not working. So, how do we combat that? Luckily, there is this extra URL parameter we can include in our request, ampersand report type equals 3, to get a lot more information out of the Wave API. Everything else is still exactly the same API key, same URL we're testing. I just specify that I want report type equal to 3, and when I send this one, and I switch it to JSON for my viewer here, you'll notice that I get back the same status and statistics here at the top, but when I get down into the contrast errors, I now have an items parameter with more details in it. Specifically, there are 2, very low contrast, and the path to it is body div A, so that's a link somewhere, and the other one that I have low contrast on is within the body tag, within a div tag, within a div tag, within a header tag, within a div tag, within a div tag, within a div tag, and so on and so forth. Which is also about as equally useful as the email that says, it's not working. At least I could try and dig through this, but we've all looked at enough Drupal sites during our days to know that trying to dig 2 or 3 levels of divs deep can be a challenge. Luckily, on top of all of that, there is a third reporting option that you can use. Instead of report type equal to 3, which is the most verbose they claim they will give you, if instead you use report type equal to 2, then we get something a bit more useful. So I'll send that request. Again, I'll switch over to JSON here. I will scroll down. And I can see now that there are 2 of them, and the ID is contrast when it's tagged in there. I have redundant links inside my alerts section, so I know to go to my page and look for links that appear the same twice in there. And I have a bit more detail in the alternative text. Is this completely useful? No, because I still hasn't nailed down exactly what my problem is. But at least I don't have to go digging through XPath or writing something to use XPath to dig into the elements I want. I can at least be a little bit more specific as to what my actual problems are, even if I can't find them and have to do some manual searching. And I can always take this Wave URL link here at the top to go to the graphical report. The other piece you'll notice here is that I've been making all of these requests through Postman, which means if I want to build this into a continuous integration process where it runs automatically for me, I need to do a whole bunch of scripting to automatically make requests, get back responses, parse them out, understand what errors exist and what errors don't, so I know whether my CI test fails or passes. And so when I was presented with that option, plus the fact that the Wave API only gives me 100 free credits, and I've used now 27 of them along with you guys, eventually I was going to have to actually pay to do all of this automated accessibility testing. And I said to myself, there had to be a better option out there. For those people who are looking at the slides later, here are some screenshots of what we just looked at. Remember, the key report type is equal to 2. Don't use 3, don't use 1. I did not show you 1, but 1 is equally as useless. Just use report type equal to 2. One other note on Wave, they don't force HTTPS, so make sure if you're putting your links in, you use the secure links versus the insecure links. We have a support ticket open with them via Twitter, asking them to make their website secure. We'll see if that comes about. But the second option that we can look at, a bit more useful than Wave potentially here, is Google Lighthouse. How many people have used Google Lighthouse before? A handful of folks? Wonderful. Google Lighthouse is obviously made by the powers that be who handle search, a la Google. It's got a couple of things going for it. The first of which is it's not strictly an accessibility tool. So while it will do accessibility testing for you, it will also do additional testing as to whether your website has good performance, whether you've optimized all of your images. If you've used the Google Webmaster Tools, where it will tell you you need to compress your JavaScript to save a couple of kilobytes and re-optimize your images, they took that and built that into this new tool along with a lot of new functionality. They also have browser and command line versions, which means we can run it as part of our CI jobs without having to write a huge script around it. Or if we need some more visual aspects to it, we can do it via the browser. And we also have a number of different output options, including JSON, HTML, or even automatically posting it to GitHub if you have your GitHub access token stored, so that you can save them as GIFs and share them with other people. So without further ado, let's get into a demo. I'll do the browser version first. So here's our trusty conference website again. If you are looking for the Google Lighthouse tools, all you have to do is open up the inspector. And depending on how it fits on your screen, there is an audits option, which is either going to be along the nav bar up here at the top or in the extra drop-down options. Everybody at the back can see okay? Wonderful. So I'll switch over to audits. And you can see here is that trusty Google Lighthouse logo. I have a number of different options here, whether I want to test mobile or desktop, all the different types of audits I want to run, so not just accessibility here, but also looking for SEO, performance. Am I following best practices? If I'm building a progressive web application, have I followed what needs to be done there? And I can also test throttling to see how my website performs on a simulated connection. Maybe if we're using 3G downstairs in some of the rooms versus our great LTE speeds. So all I have to do, normally I just take the defaults here if I'm testing visually in the browser, and I just hit run audits, and you'll see that that opens up. Lighthouse warms up, gathers information about the page. It is important to note that this is running on my computer, so it's dependent on the Wi-Fi you're using at any given time. This one was pretty good. And I can see the different scores that I got for each of these. Drupal GovCon is actually doing pretty good. I got a 90 for performance. Most importantly, for this talk we were talking about accessibility. I can pick any of these and sort of get it to jump down to that section if I want to see more details about it, and say, oh, buttons do not have an accessible name. I can expand that out. I can see what the failing element is. I even have an ID here, so if I'm trying to look back at my website, I can very quickly identify what that element is. And I can also see what Lighthouse did not test. Some things, like I said earlier, can only be tested by a human. We're struggling to test them with automated tools. Lighthouse comes out and highlights to you what those problems are that you need to check manually. So that's the visual version there. At this point, I will switch over to the CI version, if you will, which I will do through command line on my continuous integration suite. For those that haven't seen it, this is GitLab. It's very similar to GitHub or Bitbucket if you use those. One of the advantages that I find using GitLab is that it includes continuous integration as part of it, so I don't need to also go out and get Circle CI or Travis or another third party. But this will work across the board. You can apply the same principles to if you're using Circle CI, if you're using Travis, if you're using Jenkins. Any of those will work. You'll notice in here that I have just one file and that they have a bug in their UI where the sidebar isn't closing out of the way. But I will open up the web IDE. They also have a built-in web viewer for you so that you can manipulate your files there instead of having to download them, which is great for conferences like this. You'll see as part of that, at the very bottom here, I have one command, Lighthouse. I pass in a few Chrome flags where I want the output to be, and then the URL. This is copy-pastable across the board, uses a Docker image that already has Lighthouse installed in it. And so I can make this say drupalgovcon.org. It'll save the output to this output/report.html so I can look at it later if I need to. And then I can go ahead and commit that. The same as if I were doing it on my computer here. I can stage the changes, hit commit, I'll enter my commit message, live demo. And if I can scroll, all right. Good call. So I'll tab, because I can't scroll. I'll make a new branch for this following my good feature branching logic. And then just under this bottom bar here is the commit button. It's in green. You can just see it peeking up. I will push that so that it commits it, and it tells me all my changes are committed. At this point, I will go back to my project where I can find that continuous integration job running, here along the left-hand side. Let's do it this way. They represent continuous integration with a rocket ship, which is pretty cool. And I can see my pipeline kind of running here, so I'll open it up. It's a couple clicks away from me. We'll go into that job. You'll see that in the time it took me to get there, it actually finished, which is good because normally when I give this demo, I get here too early, and you can see my CI process downloading the Docker container, which always seems to take forever during a live demo. But we launch Chrome, we run the tests, tells you all the different things it's testing. And as I scroll down here, it gathers the information. And very down at the very, very bottom as I scroll here, it'll tell me that it saved the report. It also told me that the job succeeded, which is great because we just looked at this site in the desktop version and we saw we had an accessibility problem. So my CI tool didn't actually fail when I introduced an accessibility problem, but I can at least look at that report. And even if I go into the terminal, and I'll make that bigger for you, and I run it this way to get you the report, drupalgovcon.org, and I pass in the view flag so that it opens up in my browser. You'll see at the bottom it launched a new instance of Chrome for me to run these tests in. Pulls everything together, opens it up, and it has that same problem. I have an accessibility issue. I did not get a perfect score. If I jump down to that section, I have a button without an accessible name, but it doesn't fail my CI job. In order to get it to fail my continuous integration tests, I'd have to write some manual scripting to parse the report. Most likely I'd get the JSON output because that would be easier than decomposing this HTML report that I normally look at. But I still have to do more work to write all of that. And if I'm writing my own accessibility testing tool built on top of something else, I'm always concerned that I'm introducing brittleness to the equation when Google changes the output of Lighthouse and then I have to go through and update my tools. So we went back to the drawing board again. And through that we stumbled upon this application called Axe. And on top of it, there's a wrapper called Axe CLI, which gives you accessibility testing on the command line. It's made by a company up in Canada that does accessibility testing and builds websites for people. They've open sourced it. It's available on GitHub. But one of the nice things about it is it's been around since October 2016, so it's slightly more tested than Google Lighthouse, which just came out relatively recently. And even most importantly to us, it's designed for use in continuous integration systems, which is actually exactly what we want as part of our CI pipeline so that we can test this and quickly deliver features to production. So I will come back over here to my trusty GitLab. No better way to demo a continuous integration test than in a continuous integration suite. I'll go back to my web IDE, which worked so well for me last time. I'll go back into my GitLab CI file, using a Docker image here with Axe preloaded. You'll notice all I have to do is run one command, Axe. I give it the URL I want to test. In this case, we will give it, again, our trusty conference URL, drupalgovcon.org. And then you'll also notice that I'm passing in this -- exit flag. This -- exit flag is important. It's what tells Axe to emit an actual error code if you fail an accessibility test. If you don't put the -- exit in, you'll run into the same situation we had with Lighthouse, where it finishes, tells you there are problems, but doesn't fail your continuous integration tests. By passing in the -- exit, it causes it to exit with an error code of 1, which the CI system will treat as an error, whether you're using GitLab, CircleCI, Travis, Jenkins, or any of the sort. So I will go ahead and commit that. I will stage my changes. I will add a message. Use Axe for live demo. We'll tab down to create our new branch. We'll call it GovCon. And again, that green commit button is just off screen here, so I'll click that. All my changes have been committed. And then we'll go back to the project to see that CI job actually running. We'll come down to our rocket ship. You can see that my test has already failed. What that means is that I must have gotten lucky, and of the 6 runners I could have hit, I ran on one that already had my image on it. But if I come to the output here, you can see that we were testing drupalgovcon.org, and we had a button name violation that ensures buttons have discernible text. Correct invalid elements at, and then it gives me the ID. And then it actually even links you out to a website where you can learn more about this particular requirement. So if I have questions about why is this a violation, I can take this URL and go and read more about it. Similarly, I had a separate violation here where a navigation point to the primary, or ensures navigation points to the primary content of the page. You'll notice that this isn't something that Lighthouse caught. It's not even something that Wave caught, which goes back to the point that they kindly remind you of here at the bottom of their output, which is that only 20 to 50% of automated or accessibility testing issues can automatically be detected. Manual testing is always required. If needed, use multiple tools to make sure that you cover all of them. And most importantly for me, the job failed because the command terminated with an error code of 1. which means I can no longer ship updates to my dev environment, my test environment, my production environment, or any other with these changes until a developer fixes this. We cannot sweep it under the rug. We cannot ignore it. We have to address it in order to move forward with being able to deliver features. So that was the demo. So bringing it all together, we've got a number of different options. We talked about 3. There are other options out there as well. If you Google search, find one that you like. I mentioned these 3, one because they're fairly notable, at least the first 2, and the third one I have found to be the best for me and what I need to do in my day-to-day job. You might find that others work better for you, but when I did my review, Axe with their CLI had the best integration with continuous integration. And of course, it's not a replacement for manual testing either. One other note to make during all of this, as I'm sure you're wondering, how can we go about doing this? Docker containers for Lighthouse and Axe are available. If you've tried to run headless Chrome in a Docker container, which you'll probably discover if you haven't already, is that it's incredibly complicated. Chrome does not like to run in Docker whatsoever. And so building tools on top of Chrome, or even integrating tools on top of Chrome, can be a bit tricky. We've worked through a number of different issues. My best recommendation is to run Docker on your native machine if you can. It will give you the best output. If you're running Red Hat on your local machine, do be warned that Chrome does not work in Red Hat Linux. They drop support for it. We've gone through that hurdle as well. Hopefully, the easiest option if you're running Docker, and you can just run the Docker containers through your CI process or on your local machine. The key piece is this security opt flag when you go to run it. Normally, CI systems have this set for you automatically, so this is only important if you're running it on your local machine. But if you don't specify seccomp :unconfined, the whole process will fail. It will give you an undiscernible error message. You won't know what the problem is, but eventually you'll have that light bulb moment that there's an extra flag you need to pass in. What was that presentation you listened to? What is the flag that you need? With that, I'm Brian Thompson. I'm on Twitter. I will tweet the slides out afterwards. I think we have a few minutes left here for questions if anybody has them. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us at 9 a.m. in the morning. Yes?
Given that a lot of the accessibility issues are things in content and not necessarily in code, how do you fit automated accessibility testing into your development and content process?
Sure. So the question was, given that a number of accessibility issues are actually with the content, not with the code for a website, how does automated accessibility testing fit into the content strategy and how you go about developing content or having somebody else develop content for a site? Correct? Wonderful. So I think there's a number of different approaches. What I always like to do is starting with education of the people who are entering the content. They need to understand what the accessibility concerns are, what matters, are they willing to take the risk or not as they're developing content. I have gone so far as to set up CI jobs that aren't true CI jobs, but just run on some sort of cron system to test. I haven't gone as far as tying it into like a hook node save or something in Drupal so that it automatically tests the page when a user saves, but that could be an option if we really wanted to. I also know that there are other third-party tools out there that scan your website repeatedly, that test for accessibility and a number of other testing, number of other things like SEO and errors on the page. Those tools, in my experience, tend to be very pricey, pricier than I would normally like to spend, but it also depends on the client or the website and what's important to them. A lot of the ones that we're working with, or at least that I'm working with, they want accessibility and they're willing to do the work on their side to make sure the content is accessible because they have a small number of people who are putting in that content. On websites that have a larger number of people putting in content where training them isn't necessarily feasible or keeping up with that training isn't feasible, or it is ultra important to them to make sure all of their content is accessible, oftentimes those people are able to come up with the budgets to make sure that they can pay for those tools. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I've encountered situations with automated accessibility testing where it occasionally throws an error that isn't really an error. I was wondering with Axe CLI, when you have it failing your build upon errors, if there's a way to sort of manually override that if it makes a mistake.
Sure. So the question was, is there a way to automatically override certain errors if the tool is incorrectly identifying something that it believes to be an error but isn't actually an error?
Right.
I'm pretty sure Axe has a flag that you can pass in to ignore certain elements. I have not used it, and I haven't told my development team about it because I don't want them to use it as a way. I think we've all been there, right, where we need to ship that feature, and it's like, oh, this test is failing. Just comment out that test so that I can ship that feature. So I have not publicized it significantly or told anybody that it exists, but I think if you read through the Axe CLI documentation, they do have a way to accommodate that.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
The Axe CLI was a standalone tool. There's no API key. There's no limitations. It just runs in whatever environment it's in.
Axe CLI is completely standalone, no API key, no money needed. You can download it. It's an NPM package, open source. It's on GitHub. NPM install TACG, Axe-CLI will get it for you, and you can use to your heart's content.
And did it require to run with Chrome? Was that part of okay.
Yeah, so Axe CLI is built on top of Chrome. They just switched from Phantom.js since Phantom.js officially dropped its support for itself. Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
So that just does a single page at a time, correct? You can't do the whole site.
Correct. All of the tools here only test a single page at a time. So Wave API, just a single page. Lighthouse, just a single page. Axe, just a single page. I went down the rabbit hole of building a wrapper for Axe CLI that would spider a site and follow links. And I very quickly stopped on that endeavor because as soon as you get into a site with 1,000 pages of content on it, trying to get it to go through that spidering process was taking longer than I wanted CI jobs to run, and it was slowing down our ability to deliver. So in that case, normally, at least through the development process, what we try and do is make sure we're hitting a page of each of the different content types. And if we have extra pages for views, we'll put them in. So we might test 25, 30, 50 different pages that are our representative sample. And then it's only if we need to go through the process of having, like I was mentioning earlier, a sort of cron job that continuously monitors the site periodically for all of its pages to make sure they're compliant, do we go down that rabbit hole. And even with that, we opted away from the spidering solution and instead built some integration that sucks all of the routes out of the website and then just loops over them in Axe CLI. Yes, sir.
Along that front, have you built some kind of a dashboard or summary report?
Sure. So the question was, have we built any dashboards or summary reports for these? No. The most we've done is use the Lighthouse output in HTML format, or for Axe, just looked through the CI output to see and what those errors are. It's a good idea, though, to lump all of them together and have a tool that pulls all of that in with some other statuses and reporting. I like that idea. Thank you. Do you have a question?
So you talked about the manual testing that you could do with people in a room and how that interferes with frequent releases. And so now with this automated testing covering potentially 50%, where are you? How often are you doing the manual? Who do you do that with? How do you do that?
Sure. So with all this automated testing, how are we still incorporating manual testing when and where in the process? Normally it comes around when we have large features we're deploying or we're making significant changes is when we'll go back in with heavy manual testing. And when I say heavy manual testing, what that normally means is our offices are relatively close to Maryland School for the Blind. So we have a conduit of people who can help us test from that regard. Smaller manual testing is normally done by the quality assurance team, but you kind of have to be careful with that because as a developer, I've been through a checkout form enough times on websites I'm building to not even have to look at it and be able to, tab A, tab A, tab A, tab, oh, this is the zip code 21230, tab, phone number, tab, go, and do that very quickly without even looking at it. So part of the challenges we have around manual testing is just getting somebody who's not familiar with the website to be able to go through it and make sure they're understanding everything that we take for granted because we've used it so often. I would encourage you, though, if you've never worked with people to do accessibility testing who are using JAWS or screen readers, it's quite an interesting experience to go through. There are times where we've had them tell us to ignore certain accessibility requirements that we thought were going to fail and we were going to have to circle back to. This was before we did the automated testing, but we had people come in and they said, no, that's technically a requirement, but nobody fulfills that. So we've all learned how to work with it this other way, and if you actually fulfill it, you will do us more harm than good, which was very interesting. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.